Hello and welcome to Conversations about Language Teaching. I'm your host, Dr. Reed Riggs, he, him.
And I'm your other host, Dr. Diane Neubauer, she, her. And today we're going to look at a couple of listener questions. So one is related to reading and unknown words, and the other is related to assessment practices. And so I think we will probably be able to address both of those in this episode. So which do you prefer first?
You choose.
Okay, let's see. Let's go for the one I have open first on my computer. And with permission from this person, this is someone who contacted me to ask. They're an adult doing a lot of things to gain English, native speaker of German, and wanting to really push his English into a very advanced level so that he uses English in a business level,
Mm.
very formal sense. He's worried about things like gaining a lot of vocabulary and using that vocabulary appropriately in his own speech. And he's in part of this, he describes the kinds of things that he's been doing, and then comes to the final question about reading. So he's been seeking to read a variety of things and says, you can read children's stories in English or bilingual books or something he calls the Frank reading method, Frank, capital F. So I'm not familiar with that one, but
Mm.
he has the idea that maybe these children's stories or in reading in general, he's encountering a lot of words that he doesn't know. And it surprises him that in a children's book,
Oh,
he's getting a lot of unknown words.
yeah,
So that's one question
sure.
about it. But then there's also, what does he do with all those unknown words? Should he write them down? Should he note them in a document and practice them as vocabulary? He recognizes that some say that that would be a waste of time. Would it be better to read with an ebook where you can tap on the word and see a translation? Maybe over time you can gain something from that. Or, maybe you want to do like even more beginning level children's books and he's really wanting to be very effective. And he says he recognizes there's some perfectionist tendencies, but he's overwhelmed by all the possibilities. He really wants to be most efficient and gain the most possible juice for the, the
Yeah,
squeezing that he's doing. And so let's talk about that. So one, the children's
yeah,
books as a source, I think, and then dealing with unknown words in written text. And what do you do with that?
sure. Well, lucky for all of us. I'm in my daughter's room right now, and
Hey,
I'm just
yeah.
surrounded by children's books. There's just a
Yeah,
big
and
old
she's
pile down
not
there.
quite three
Not
yet.
quite three yet. She'll be three
Yeah.
soon. Um, Children's books are they're their own genre.
Yes.
As you know, educators of small children and parents and families, caregivers, there's a lot of idealism dumped into children where it's like, I'm going to make you the most sophisticated little person. So you'll know all the trucks. You're going to know
Hmm.
all the different fish. And there's just a lot of it. Their full-time job is learning. You watch them learn how to walk. They learn how to hold a spoon and feed themselves. Like their whole job is learning. And the vocabulary that's in their books can also be highly technical because
Hmm.
it's trying to teach them, once upon a time, this fabulous prince was
Hmm.
sauntering one day, and it's loaded up with as much vocabulary. Because the idea is to just like see how far you can push them. Like
Yeah.
that's
And
really what you're trying to do. Yeah.
the presumption is that that child is fluent in the quote basic daily life things so
Yeah.
that they know like
Yeah.
one time I walked into, like
Yeah.
so
Well,
they know the walked already. You
it's
don't have to
yeah,
begin with that the way that you
sure.
would with a second language learner.
It's very simultaneous, I would say. That you're
Hmm.
not really sequencing. There's no sequencing. You're not saying, "Oh, you're not ready for the day. You're not done with your daily stuff, so you're not ready for this book stuff."
Yes,
There's
yes,
absolutely no
very true.
sequencing. So like, and we don't really. We just say just five little monkeys jumping on the bed. Does that look? I'm holding up for the camera right now, and I'm just grabbing random books off the shelf right now. But we don't say like, oh, is this vocabulary appropriate? Usually it's more about are the concepts appropriate. So
Mm-hmm.
five little monkeys said goodnight to their mama. Then five little monkeys jumped on the bed. One fell off and bumped his head. So bumped might be a word that you're not expecting. You'd say like, oh, we don't use that so much, or that sounds like kind of a less frequent
Yeah.
word as an adult.
Yeah.
We use bump your head all the time because it's relevant to the
Exactly.
lives of children that they bump
There
their
we
arms and
go.
bump their heads. So the
Yeah, they're
actual like
constantly bumping
the
something.
bumping
Yeah.
something, yeah, and so like it's actually a very useful word for that age group
Yeah,
to be
fell
talking
down, I
about.
think, too, or
I
dropped
fell
things.
down,
And
yeah, and dropped.
hmm
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of actions that, and so if we were to say, oh, when you're older, you won't need those words, absolutely misses the point of why we're using those words with children. It's relevant to their lives right now. So, but there's also a lot of just kind of fancy stuff dumped into some books. There's a beautiful
yeah.
one called Owl Moon, and it's a quiet walk through the snowy forest where a dad wants to show his daughter, I think it's a daughter, an owl. And so they're just walking and walking, and the daughter's kind of bored and scared, and the whole thing just captures this feeling of like being out in the woods. I love it in Hawaii because we're not in it's another world for us.
Different
Like
woods, huh?
snow
Yeah.
and being out in the woods in the snow at night, and it's a whole mood, it's a whole scene. So the part that interests me is that you want to learn for business purposes. I would kind of do a bit of a few things, but expose yourself to a lot of that if that's your context that you want to be using the language in.
Right. Children's
Exposing
books are
yourself.
the not this match of
It's not
context.
your context. Yeah.
Yeah. Will you learn words and phrases and things like from that that might be applicable? Yes, but if your goal is like to be able to use those new things immediately in this context of business formal settings,
Yeah.
then that's not the most, I would say, efficient.
Yeah.
So
Well, and
yeah, I would,
the phrases also aren't like transferable really. Like it's like Mama called
yeah,
the doctor and the doctor said. You wouldn't like slot in your name like I called the doctor and the doctor said. That would actually trigger our that would cause a lot of people to remember this specific rhyme. Like
right.
it's if you say like, oh, how's your, how'd that surgery go? Oh, I called the doctor and the doctor said. You might then say to me,
Yeah.
no more monkeys jumping on the bed because
Yes.
that's how we know
There's
that specific
the
phrase.
rhythm is
Yeah.
poetry.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
poetry. So, I think that the context that you're aiming for would be more, it'd be more productive and you'd be more ready to just use it in that context. And the thing is, everyone is in a context. If you're saying like, oh, I don't want to be in any place. Okay, well, what place do you want to be in? No, I want to be in no place. Like, no, it's just the nature of life and reality. You're in a place. You're always in some place. And you're always in some context when you're using language. There's always some context for that language usage. And it kind of doesn't matter which one you're in. I would diversify a little bit beyond the specific business language, but
Mhm.
put your
Yeah.
main focus there. And
Yeah.
watching TV. If you
I was
enjoy,
thinking,
yeah.
yeah, I was thinking like shows that take place in a similar kind of a business
Oh,
environment
sure. You watch The
or
Office. Yeah.
talk about
Oh, there's a
things
German
that are going to
Office.
be there.
Germany
Yeah.
made their
Oh, yeah.
own kind of like it was a British show, and then the
Oh, a
Americans made
version?
their own. There's a
Yeah.
German one, and I've seen a little bit. A German friend of mine was telling me that it wasn't funny and the jokes didn't land, but that's for a German person. I was
Yeah.
laughing the whole time because I was like, oh, I basically get what's going on, which is a whole different issue of
Humor.
when humor, you get humor in a different way depending on I guess how familiar you are with the language and culture.
Hmm.
Um, so, anyways, the other thing is that getting language through reading is something that I try to hammer to my students a lot. I choose videos for my students to watch, and we'll set up formative assessments where I'll say, okay, you're gonna have to come in. You'll study from the video. I used to just give them the actual video with subtitles, and then I realized, and they still ask. They'll say, when we do the actual assessment task, will there be the subtitles there? And I used to say, yeah, full authenticity. Yeah, we got to make it exactly how it would be in the real world. You'd have those subtitles, and so the difference though is that in the real world you wouldn't have like a bunch of study time knowing that those would be the subtitles coming up. What I
Hmm.
find with my students is that my goal is to get them to listen a lot, to train their ears on that video because it's some sort of natural speech I want them to get used to. What they'll do instead is say, okay, but what's the easiest route? Well, the
Hmm.
easiest route is to study those subtitles and
Yeah.
then not really listen because I can just do freeze frames. And so I just study those subtitles, memorize that, and then when I get
Hmm.
there, just freeze frame and like use the subtitles to write out whatever I have to write out. And so now I'll do things like, okay, if my goal is listening, I tell them in advance, you're only going to get an audio version. I know it
Hmm.
reduces authenticity. I understand that, but I have to make that trade-off because you're not treating it in the way that I was
Yeah.
intending for you to treat it. I
Yeah.
wanted the assessment experience to be you sit down and watch that video and hear that audio and then rely on the speaking to get the task done. And you guys have
Yeah.
found a
Not a
shortcut.
hack.
Yeah, you guys
Yeah.
have found a roundabout way to not do what I'm asking. So therefore, I have to reduce authenticity and so just give you an audio version, which doesn't resemble what you would do in real life, but it does get at the piece that I want you to do in real life, which is to listen to people talking. The reason I
Yeah.
do that is because you got to train your ears. And I tell students, human spoken language is not represented in our written systems.
Yeah. It's going to be
It's
different.
very partially, it's so partial. It's like
Hmm.
in English, you get kind of the phonetics, you get none of the rhythm, you get none of the merging that goes on with, we say, words that are used together, fused together,
Yeah.
how we talk. Like if you say,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, oh no.
That's I don't know.
Yeah, oh
Hmm.
no. Yeah, oh no when he's yeah, I have no idea when he's going to be there. If I slow it down, I have no idea when he's going to be there. So
Yeah.
like we that's how we naturally talk, and I want my students to train their ears on that.
Sure.
And um I think we
Yeah.
have a big problem where we think of language as a written system, and then we miss
Mm.
out on like actually
Yeah.
you can't even understand people when they talk if you only read.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, where you can, I think, gains from reading, and I think this person kind of knows that, is that that vocabulary expansion has been something that's really been found in research
Yeah,
in extensive reading to be
yeah,
really effective. So
sure.
if it's vocabulary he wants and phrasing and ways of talking that are going to be relevant to the context of a business world in Germany, in English language use, but in the German context, then finding writers and authors who talk about that setting a lot. Or
Yeah,
like I know there's a ton of books by famous business people. I don't know the names of these books, but
yeah.
I would look for that kind of a book.
Oh yeah.
Not look for a textbook that claims to be
Mm,
presenting you with
mm,
dialogues that
mm.
are taking place in that setting, because those are often, unless
And if you're a
they were
beginner,
actually based on
yeah. Oh
recordings.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Well, yeah, if I mean just to get a little bit maybe, but don't treat that like, oh, this is the way to do it.
yeah.
This is
No,
the
yeah,
conversational thing.
yeah,
Like if it's based on a conversation analysis kind of an approach where they take actual recordings of people and they put the actual details of what was said in 20 different similar settings, then it could be helpful to look at a textbook style. But mostly I would be looking for that. And then his question about like, what do I do with the unknown words? This is where I think like,
oh
how
yeah,
high was his comprehension of the text?
sure.
If it's so many new words that you are past about 2 words out of 100 are unknown,
1 in 50, yeah,
then yeah, 1 in 50 or so,
yeah,
you are probably reading something that you're not going to be as beneficial. It's not going to benefit you as much
sure,
as if you find something that's at that level where
hmm
it's like that
yeah,
2% of the content is a new word.
yeah,
And that feels like, I think a lot of, at least for me,
yeah,
coming from a different background, my thought would have been that, well, that sounds less efficient because that's not enough new words for me to feel like I
mm.
got some really meaty
Okay,
gains
yeah,
here.
sure,
But no, you're getting more than just words when you're reading,
yeah,
despite it being different from speech. You're still gaining a lot of the sense of the structure of the language,
yeah,
the contextual use of words
yeah,
and meaning of those words that develops not just through 1 or 2 exposures, but through multiple ones. So lots of reading that is going to do that. If you're hitting that little 2%, you might be able to skip over finding a definition for them. And if those words occur again,
yeah,
you're going to be picking up a little bit more of the meaning and recognition of it over time.
yeah,
If you wanted to look those up, you could, but now you've moved from extensive reading and getting a whole language experience to really a deep dive intensive reading.
sure,
And for some purposes, that might be good, but I
yeah,
wouldn't want that to be the whole
no,
diet.
right. Yeah,
So
I was
you want
thinking
to,
diet was the metaphor I was thinking too, that yeah, you want a balanced diet of
yeah, and I would
they do
treat that
different things.
intensive reading,
Yeah.
that's the dessert. I mean, I know most people don't find it
Or
fun.
the salad or something.
Yeah, it's
It's
not the main
it's
course.
the one that yeah, it's the one that you don't want to it's the one
Yeah,
that is less
solely
less
do.
desirable, and you should have kind of just a little bit of it. Yeah, and you do something different with that. Like with extensive reading here being defined as what do they call it? I-1. Like it's
Hmm.
mostly all comprehensible in terms of
Yeah, it's that
words and in terms of
98% or better
yeah, and that you
familiar
also find
content.
that you're understanding it, like you're understanding the message as you're reading.
Yeah.
The intensive reading, it's just going to be a whole lot of new words. You probably want to have shorter texts. You want to do things with them like repeat reading. If you're a very
Yeah.
motivated learner, you could even make flashcards for those and go through those flashcards.
Yeah.
I've seen that be really helpful for a student who jumped in our junior year and
Hmm.
she's just hitting the ground running because she has a big exam coming. And I didn't tell her to make flashcards, but she does it, and I'm seeing it really making a massive difference for her. So yeah, it sounds like you're someone who would be okay with having some sort of, making flashcards or doing something a little rigorous as
Yeah.
well. But
Yeah.
but
But
that shouldn't
pulling them
be
out from that
from
context
that
that you got them in
context.
and then
Yeah.
re-experiencing them by
Yep.
continuing to read extensively
Yep.
those highly comprehensible texts where
Yep.
presumably those words should
Yep.
start to appear if
Yep.
you're reading enough in the same field
Yep.
that you're wanting to really gain that
Your
language
goal with
from.
all of them is that you understand the message of what you're reading.
Yeah.
That the words, if you go look at there's a metaphor of like a building or a housing structure. Like if you look at a brick building, you don't want to get too intensely just looking at one brick for a long time. It's like, do you see the entire structure? And so the same with reading, do you get the overall message? As you read each sentence, do you understand what that sentence is contributing to the overall message? Like this is what we'll just call meaning. Do you get meaning while you're reading? And I think a lot of times as language learners, language teachers do this, language learners do this as a default. We focus on that one brick and we go, I'm getting it. It's like, I don't think you're that's a piece of it. Yes, that brick needs to be there. Yes, like yeah,
Yeah.
but you're
That's,
you're
yeah.
you're too you're zoomed in too much.
Yeah.
And if you can't zoom out, if you can't, I have students say this to me all the time. They'll go both ways. They'll say, "Oh, I know the overall meaning. I just don't know what any of the words mean." Okay, you
Hmm.
also need to know what the words mean. Or they'll say, "I know what each of these words mean. I just don't know the overall meaning."
The
Okay,
picture.
you
Yeah.
also need to know the overall meaning. Like,
Yes.
go back and do that. I would, for the intensive reading, I would have shorter things, and I would kind
Yeah.
of revisit it.
And
And
less time, I think.
when do you know you're done with it? It's when you can read it for meaning, and
Mm.
then go on to something else. But it should be short and tiny, and well, it should be based on how much of it is the appropriate load for you in that moment. So
Hmm.
if it's a real business text and you're like, I don't understand any word in this sentence, well, then maybe just choose one sentence and see if you can understand that one sentence. I've been telling my students, as you keep reading, the words start repeating.
Hmm.
If you just stick with it, and if you're in that one subject area, then
Yeah.
it's most likely that the same kinds of jargon and also just language usage, even if it's a word like go, that they might use the word go in specific verbal phrases, or
Hmm.
phrasal verbs, that you got to get used to. But as you
Yeah.
keep reading in that area, in that business area or that work area, whatever it is you've chosen, those repeated words will start to help contribute to the overall meaning of what you're reading. And so things that start out as intensive might later on become more like
Hmm.
extensive reading, especially if
Yeah.
it's on a really narrow topic that you've already read about before.
Yeah.
Then you have a
Yeah, that
lot.
issue of
Yeah.
that like narrow reading, that's a Stephen Krashen thing too, isn't it?
Okay.
That's it's
It probably
a
is.
the idea of reading within one author and reading lots of books by that author.
Oh, okay.
Like because you're going to tend to encounter those same words again and again. Reading all the kinds of books about baseball because you're so passionately into it. Like that kind of an idea is a productive use of reading time for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
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 I thought of one other, maybe a tip that I think might be useful, but to address the issue of the perfectionist feel or the fear of using words, quote, wrongly,
Oh, yeah.
unquote, to the native speaker of English. Um, and that's maybe just, well, two maybe sub things. One is just accepting that you're a non-native speaker and that you have a beautiful use of English that is unique to you.
Yeah.
And as a non-native speaker of the language, you will not sound like a monolingual native speaker of English, and that's fine. That's
Hmm.
good.
Yeah.
However, if you're concerned that you might be miscommunicating things, getting good at checking for the person's understanding of what you said would be very helpful.
Hmm.
Like let me just check and see, are we on the same page now? Like using that kind of phrase. What
Mm,
I mean is this. And
mm.
when I say blah, 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 blah,
Yeah.
I mean blah, 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 like giving synonyms or parallel phrasing for what you're intending so that your meaning isn't just locked in on exact one word used out of the usual context a native speaker might expect, but you're giving more of a context and you're opening socially the dynamic of I'm approachable. This is not about my ego. You can ask me if I've said
Oh yeah.
something you're not sure what I meant.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
going to check in with you, see what you perceived my meaning to be, and this back and forth, that kind of negotiating for meaning
Mm.
is welcome and not threatening. I think that might be a good
Yeah.
follow-up.
Yeah, on occasion. If it's you don't want to also treat people like a language tutor, like an unpaid language
Right. Oh,
tutor.
yes. Yeah. And
Yeah,
I don't mean so much that, but
not
about
too much. On
focusing
occasion.
on the meaning being clear,
Oh yeah,
not
yeah,
on
yeah. No, oh
correct
yeah,
my
yeah.
language,
Okay.
but more of, you know, I'm trying to get this idea across. Let me say it a couple ways or
Sure, sure, sure.
yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And you'll also see in in the other person's response, how well, how accurately they understood what you were trying to talk about.
Right.
But yeah, to check in is also good. So remind me of the context one more time.
Yeah. Adult learner, native speaker of German,
Got it.
seeking
English.
jobs in English, really trying to perfect what
Got
appears
it.
to me
Okay.
to be a very high level of English already.
Got it. Got it. Got it. You're in luck because there's just a world of English language media and English
Hmm.
language media, entertainment media,
Yeah.
that exists in office workplaces. So yeah. And the other thing too is that the the usage of words, because that's the focus we have here, is so vast and complex that you really don't want to treat it as like, oh, I learned that word now. Oh, I'm done with that word. Like
Yeah.
the usage of words is going to be like an ocean. And so
Hmm.
how do you approach the ocean? You don't try to see the entire ocean all in a short amount of time. You just
Right.
spend some time doing what you can with what you've got. And I think that, yeah, finding reading for vocabulary. And if you want to watch like, you know, training videos, or if you can find things online
Hmm.
that are like not fun,
Yeah, true.
that could
True.
be
Yeah.
also technical.
Right.
I would also
They,
focus sort of like needs analysis, like what is the exact kind of job you're looking for. But also office banter could be something you get from the American Office and the British Office, those TV shows.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, maybe this learner I see in the message here too, that past teachers emphasized perfect grammar and pronunciation. And so
No,
I
I
think
don't know
that's
what that
built
is.
in
I don't know what that means.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so because of that over prescriptive, over
Yeah.
corrective, I think it's kind of trained that sense of like, oh, what if I use it wrong kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And fortunately, most people in real life are not nearly so so pedantic to
Yeah.
like fuss over, you didn't use the right tense there. I can't imagine somebody doing that. If they could
No.
understand the meaning, they're
Yeah.
not going to be, you
But
know,
and people are exposed to foreign speakers of languages typically, and we're very adaptive. And also,
yeah,
no two people speak exactly the same. And we say, oh, that's I can hear Jan from down the hall. Like I know that's Jan because of her voice, because of there's some rhythm to it. It's like every person has their own unique way of speaking. And if there's some sort of foreign thing going on, I actually think it catches my attention when someone talks like an American and then says they're not from America. And that actually trips me up where I say, oh wait, how is it that you talk like an American? I met someone a teacher at a Start Talk conference about 6, 7 years ago who was from, I don't remember where, maybe Saudi Arabia. And I thought they were American. And they said, no, no, I just started learning English like 3 years ago.
wow.
And I said, what is going on? And some people just have like a
Hmm. Really
brain wired
adaptive. Yeah,
for picking up
yeah,
the prosody
yeah.
of other speakers. Yeah.
I will say that in high school, I knew an international student who was with the AFS program I was kind of involved in at the time. She was from the Netherlands, and her English sounded extremely American. Like there was no perceptible
Yeah.
not Americanness. And she actually said, this has been a disadvantage to me because people assume I know all the cultural things.
Mm.
Like they
Yeah.
then make references and I don't understand. And I don't, she felt culturally lost
Yeah.
because people would over assume that because her language sounded so much the same that like, well, of course you're from here and you know all the same things that we're referring to.
Yeah.
And yeah, so in a
Yeah.
way, there was an advantage to having a little bit of a
Yeah.
unique, you know.
Yeah.
So
Language and your social associations are very much tied up. My
yeah,
teenagers, my 11th graders will not talk like the sixth graders at our school. Sixth graders have
deliberately
a bunch of
sometimes.
slang.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when I bring up the sixth grade slang, the seniors
Yeah.
go, "Oh, no, 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 that's the sixth graders."
Yeah.
People use language in ways that identify what social groups they're a part of. And to pretend that you are from that country can cause other kinds of misunderstandings that you didn't intend.
Yeah.
So this idea of the ideal speaker, I think, it's a language teacher fantasy. It doesn't really play out in the real world like that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're at time.
Yep.
I gotta run.
Yep. We didn't get to the other question about testing assessment, but that's
Ooh,
something we
that
can
sounds like
dive
a
into another time.
great future episode.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Diane. This has been fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good to talk.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for
Yep.
listening. Okay.
Bye bye.
Bye.